Chapter 6. Edward and Kate Slater. Edward Slater may have gotten acquainted with the Abramhurst family during Sanford Slater's brief stay in Brown County, Kansas, prior to moving north across the border into Jefferson County, Nebraska. On August 28, 1879, he married Rebecca Catherine Kate Hurst. The wedding took place in Andrew County, Missouri, where Kate was born. Abram Hurst Jr. and his son-in-law Edward, and their families, seemed to migrate between Andrew County and Brown County, Kansas, down through the years. Ed and Kate had 9 children, 8 girls and 1 boy. Haiti Alice was born Monday, June 14, 1880, in Nebraska, and Lulu Vista was born Saturday, May 26, 1883, and Sarha Susan Susie was born Thursday, September 1, 1887. Lou and Susie were born in either Jefferson County, Nebraska, Brown County, Kansas, or Andrew County, Missouri. Margaret Adele was probably born in Andrew County, Missouri, or Brown County, Kansas, in circa 1889. She died from heart trouble, in about 1903, in Andrew County, Missouri. And finally, just before Christmas, on Monday, December 21, 1891, their first and only son, Avery Abram, was born, in either Brown County, Kansas, or Andrew County, Missouri. My mother Gladys Ellen Slater was born on Friday, New Year's Day, in 1897, on a farm that Grandpa rented, about 3 miles north of the little town of Fillmore. November 3rd, of that same year, Kate's eldest daughter Hattie would give birth to her first child, Lois Fay, on Wednesday, November 3rd. Gladys and Lois would always seem more like sisters than aunt and niece. Ova Zella Z. was born on Friday, October 13, 1899, and last but not least, Anise Annie was born on Friday, February 8, 1901. Both she and her sister Z were also born in Andrew County, Missouri, in the Fillmore, Bolcow, Rosendale area. Even though my mother was quite young at the time, she could recall her older sister Maggie, and remembers her death. She said when Maggie was about 13, she was walking home from school, when a bad storm blew in, and frightened her, and she ran home as fast as she could. It was more than her weak heart could take, and she died that evening. Gladys started to school in 1903. I believe that at that time she attended the Stone School, south of Fillmore. She told me that she had a mean old school teacher, who gave her a paddling one day, over practically nothing. She said that she was really afraid of him. Lucky for her, the family moved often, and the kids changed schools often. I believe from there, they moved over to the Bolcow area, and Edward rented a farm 2 miles south of Bolcow, on what is now Road 132. Southeast 4, of the Southeast 4, of Section 15, R35W, T61N. Several decades later, I was telling an acquaintance of mine, Francis Haney, who lived near Oak, Missouri, about my grandpa renting this farm, and he said that farm belonged to my grandpa, Will Neely. What a small world this is. Gladys and her siblings attended Upper Neely School, just to the east of Bolcow, and also Lower Neely School, about a mile north of Rosendale, and just to the north of the Lower Neely Cemetery. They rode an old horse to school. It was somewhere around that time, when Edward was about 40 years old, that he cut his leg on a wire fence, and it became infected. He took the train from Bolcow to the Innsworth Hospital, in St. Joseph, Missouri. They amputated his right leg below the knee. After returning home, it became infected again, and he made a return trip, and they amputated again just below the hip. Considering the crude medical facilities at the turn of the century, he was fortunate to have survived the ordeal. He built his own wooden leg, and it served him well. Grandpa was like many renters, they usually moved about every March 1st. That was normally the date everyone moved, and it was usually a nasty rainy windy day. This time I believe they moved south of Rosendale, just off of Highway 71, on what is now Road 58, just to the west of where their daughter Hattie was living. 16-year-old Hattie Alice Slater married Carl Gibson in 1896, at Bullcough, Missouri, Andrew County. He was the son of Wesley and Mary E. Gibson. The poor little girl would remain pregnant for the latter part of the next 12 years. As mentioned before, Lois Fay was her firstborn child, and all of Hattie's children were born in the Fillmore, Bolcow, Rosendale area of Andrew County. Wesley Edward was born Wednesday, August 9, 1899, and Lilia Maggie, was born, Thursday, June 13, 1901. Irma Colleen, was born, Tuesday, June 17, 1902. Twin boys, Clyde Conrad, and Clarence were born, Sunday, September 23, 1906. In 1904, Vista Lou Slater, married James Earl Russell, at Savannah, Missouri. In 1905, my great-grandmother, Margaret Cole Hurst, passed away, and was laid to rest in the North Cemetery at Hiawatha, Kansas. A terrible tragedy struck the Gibsons, when the young mother of these 6 small children passed away. The cause of her death was attributed to what the doctor described as locked bowels. It could have been any number of things that could have caused that. She was only 28 years of age. My mother, who was 11 years old at the time, told me that she and her parents, and some of her brothers and sisters were there when their eldest sister passed away. She and Lois were downstairs with the other children, 9-year-old Wesley, 7-year-old Lelia, 6-year-old Irma, and the 2-year-old twins Clyde and Clarence. The magnitude of this horrendous scene is unimaginable. If there is a power that controls human beings' destinies, then this has to be the most demoniac creature of all time. If not, then one cannot imagine any worse luck. My mother's sister, Aunt Lou and Uncle Earl Russell, could not have children, so they took little Irma to raise as their own. Many years later, my mother pointed out the big old 2-story house that stood along Highway 71. It was a mile north of the Bennett Lane Cemetery, where Hattie was laid to rest. A few years later, the old house was razed, and a few trees is all that remains, where so much heartache took place so many years ago. Its location was in the southwest one-quarter of Section 18, R35W, T6 on. I don't know how the children's father managed to raise the other 5 children. I'm sure he remarried, but I am not aware of who or when. One of the twins passed away at the age of 12, on March 10, 1918. There was a great flu plagued in America and Europe at that time, and could very well have been the cause of his death. World War I was raging in France, and soldiers were dying by the thousands at the battlefront from the flu epidemic, and it had spread back to the U.S. back in those days before modern medicine. Many plagues would periodically ravage the country. The amazing thing that came out of all of the chaos that was swirling around this unfortunate family was the fact that all of the children grew up to lead very successful and productive lives, and raised children that followed in their footsteps. On Wednesday, January 1, 1913, Avery Abram Slater married Gertrude Gertie Hewitt. That same day, Gladys Slater was celebrating her 13th birthday. Not long after the marriage, they moved to Kansas. They started farming, about a mile south of the town of Horton, on the Indian reservation. I'm pretty sure that Edward and Kate Slater joined their son and his wife there, at that time. During that same year, a baby girl was born, that they named Hazel Dell. She died at birth, or shortly after. My mother, Gladys Slater, told me that she cooked at the Andrew County Jail, when she was a young girl. She said that Uncle Billy Hurst was the sheriff there. The record indicates that William R. Hurst was sheriff from 1909 to 1913. He was actually her second cousin, but was in his late 30s during his one term as sheriff. She said that she always called him Uncle Billy, even though he was not her uncle, but was a relative of hers. The record indicates that he was her second cousin. My mother played the piano by ear, and could still play Rebecca's Sunnybrook Farm, when she was an elderly lady. She said that as a young girl, she played for the silent movies. In 1914, Fred Hartley purchased a store at 120.5 Th Street, on the west side of the Savannah Square, and converted it into a movie theater. It had a popcorn machine, and a piano player. At that time she was 17 years old, and this is very likely the theater that she played in. At this point in time the old building still stands. It has had many different occupants over the years. On October 15, 1915, Abram Hurst Jr., farmer and Civil War veteran, passed away. I think he died in Andrew County, but he was laid to rest next to Margaret, in the North Hiawatha Cemetery. He was 77. In 1915, Ova Z was living on a farm in Kansas, with her folks, when she met and married Addison Addie King. He worked for the railroad, and traveled out of Omaha, Nebraska. She went with him to Omaha, and they made their home there. At that time, Edward and Kate Slater were farming in Brown County, Kansas, near their son Avery. In 1916, Gladys was boarding with Aunt Lou and Uncle Earl Russell, in a rented house, at 3116 North 11th Street, in St. Joseph, Missouri. She was working as a seamstress for the Richardson Dry Goods Company, in that city. On Friday, October 13, 1916, a son was born to Avery and Gertrude Slater. They named him Leo Eldon. Also on that same day, Avery's sister Ova Z. Slater King had a boy, and named him J. Bennett King. On Monday, December 8, 1919, Anise Annie Slater married Merle Clifford Smith, in Omaha, Nebraska. She probably met him through Z, who was living there at the time. She was 18, and Cliff was 17. The following year, on Wednesday, November 17, 1920, they had a daughter, Loris Fay. At the time, they were living at Avenue City, Missouri. Everone thinks that in Grandma Kate's photos, she looks like an Indian. And I agree, she certainly does. However, there are no known ancestors who were Indian. Grandpa never used a cane, and his peg leg served him well the remainder of his life. Except for the time when a horse kicked him, and broke his leg. However, he soon found a piece of hardwood, and built himself a new one. When cousin Leo Slater was a youth, growing up in Kansas, he helped Grandpa farm. He said, when Grandpa rode a horse-drawn cultivator, he removed his peg leg, and wired it across the cultivator. Grandpa never owned a home, or even a piece of ground, and in spite of his severe handicap, he managed to raise some wonderful children, who raised some of the finest cousins that a person could ever wish for. Donald Lloyd Slater of Omaha, NE, a great-grandson of Edward Slater, is the youngest of the 3 remaining male Slaters in the Ed Slater line of descendants. With him will go the Slater name, in this branch of the Slater family tree. In 1920, Gladys changed jobs and became employed in the office of the St. Joe and Grand Island Railroad. She was 23 years old. She also moved into the YWCA, in downtown St. Joe. Here we will leave Gladys Ellen Slater, as destiny launches her on a collision course with Lester Armstrong Jarrett,